We continue now at the top of Daf Lamed Vav Amud Beis in Mesechet Sanhedrin. This is Sanhedrin Daf 36b. On the previous Amud, Rav said that a Rebbe and his student can both be counted as separate judges on a court involving a capital case. And the Gemara asks from a Brisa, which seems to imply otherwise. And the Gemara now answers, Ki ko amar Rav, when did Rav say that a student can be counted as a separate judge? Kagon Rav Kahana v'Rav Asi. For example, let's say you have Rav Kahana and Rav Asi, de legamre de Rav havitzriche. They only needed to learn the traditions of Rav. Velisvore de Rav lo havitzriche. They did not need to learn how to reason from Rav. They independently were able to reason, and therefore they're considered like independent judges. Rashi explains, Kiko amar Rav de Talmido nimne. When did Rav say that the student is counted as a separate judge? Lo amar el kagon Rav Kahana Rav Asi. He was talking specifically about students like Rav Kahana and Rav Asi. De legamore havitzriche. They needed to learn the traditions. Lamasha shama me Rabbo. They needed to learn the traditions from their Rebbe. Avolisvore. But in terms of logic, limtso rayu so liyajiv ataimim, to find proofs, to give reasons, einon tzrichen. They didn't really need that. Hilkach gavra be'apei nafshu. Therefore, they're considered like an independent person. The imisham gemara de shama minei. Because if you're just talking about the traditions that somebody hears from his Rebbe, Kol Yisrael nami mi Moshe kiblo. All of Klal Yisrael had the same Rebbe. They got the tradition from Moshe Rabbeinu. Vein elu taimim havonas libo. This has nothing to do with the reasonings of a person. The name him haisa chachmasu mi pi Rav Acher have omer tam acher, where we would say if he learned from a different Rebbe, he would have given a different reason. No, these people were independent, and therefore they're considered to be independent judges. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rabbi Avo says, Asara dvarim yesh bein dinei mamanis ladinei nefashos. There are 10 differences between monetary cases and capital cases. V'chul onei noagin b'shor haniskol, and all of these differences don't apply by shor haniskol, by an axe that's being stoned, meaning to say, shor haniskol is treated like dinei mamanis, chutz mei esrim u'shlosh, except for the requirement of 23 judges. That requirement, which is a requirement by capital cases, does apply by shor haniskol. That's the only dinei nefashos requirement that applies by shor haniskol. And the Gemara continues, Menahani Mili, from where do we know this? Amar Rav Acha bar Papa, Rav Acha bar Papa says, Diamar Krutz, because the pasuk says, Lo sata mishpat evyoncha berivo. This is the pasuk that is used to teach us that a majority of one judge is not enough by capital cases to say guilty, and we understand it to mean mishpat evyoncha iatomata, this judgment of your poor, that you can't just have one judge to say guilty by capital cases. Avalatamata mishpat shel shor haniskol. However, you could do that. It could be a majority of just one judge saying guilty. When it comes to the judgment of a shor haniskol, that's how you see that a shor haniskol is not exactly the same as a regular capital case. And the Gemara continues, Asara, you're saying that there are 10 differences between capital cases and monetary cases. Hateshave, really, if you look in the Mishnah, it was just 9. And the Gemara interrupts and says, Asara katani, what do you mean that it's just 9? If you look in the Mishnah, it actually is 10. What's the Gemara's question that it's 9? And the Gemara answers, Misham de'ein hakol ksherin ve'esrim u'shlosha chadahi. It's because when the Mishnah says not everyone can be a judge in capital cases, excluding, for example, a mamzer, and then the Mishnah says 23 judges are required by capital cases, that's all really the same reason. It's all counted as one, and that's why the Gemara is asking, really it seems to be only 9 differences between capital cases and monetary cases. And the Gemara answers, Ha'ika achrisi, there is one other difference between capital cases and monetary cases as follows. Tanya, as we learned in a Brisa, Ein Moshivin b'Sanhedrin, we do not allow there to be judges in the Sanhedrin that are zakin, that are old. It means to say they're old and therefore they're not taking care of raising their children. They don't have a certain amount of rachmanus because of that. You need to have judges who have rachmanus, besaris, and similarly somebody who's castrated who doesn't have children for that reason. Again, he can't be a judge in the Sanhedrin. Umisha ein lo banim, and somebody who doesn't have children for the same reason cannot be a judge in the Sanhedrin. So this is another difference between capital cases and monetary cases. And the Gemara continues, Rabbi Yehuda Mosif af achzori. Rabbi Yehuda adds, even someone who's cruel cannot be a judge. And the Gemara comments, v'chilufein b'meses. It's the opposite when it comes to cases of a meses, trying someone who incites against avodah zarah. There we're not particularly looking for those who are merciful. To Rachman Amar, because when it comes to a meses, the pasuk says, lo sachmal v'lo sachasa olav. You can't have mercy and you cannot cover for that individual. And Rashi explains, Asara devarim tanan b'masnis, and again the 10 differences between dinei nefashos and dinei mamanis that are in the Mishnah earlier. V'chulan eina noagin b'din shor haniskol, and they all don't apply by shor haniskol. Lios shava l'dinei nefashos, meaning it's not the same as dinei nefashos. Afal pi shamarnu b'perakamal inyan esrim u'shlosha k'misas bailam kach misas hashor. Even though we said in the first parak that in terms of 23 judges, shor haniskol is the same, but with regards to the other issues, it is not the same. Chutz mei esrim u'shlosha shetzarech av gimel k'dinei nefashos. Again, when it comes to shor haniskol, 23 judges are required, just like dinei nefashos. And the Gemara quoted the pasuk of Lo Sata L'Ro Al Pi Echad. As we said, the pasuk of Lo Sata is teaching that when it comes to saying guilty by dinei nefashos, You can't just have a majority by one judge. But when it comes to shor niskal, a majority by just one judge is enough. From here we learn out that all of the differences between capital cases and monetary cases do not apply by shor niskal, except for the requirement of 23 judges. All of the other things, besides saying the requirement of 23 judges, are just that we want to try to say that the person should be innocent. We want to try to find a person innocent in a capital case. Why should we say that by shor hamud? It makes more sense to just be mekayim the pasuk that we should destroy this shor, which is evil. And the Gemara says, Hatisha Hava, why are you saying there's 10? There's really 9. But then we ask on the question, what do you mean 9? There really are 10. What's the question of the Gemara? And the Gemara explains the reason why we see it as 9 is because ein hakol ksherin, and the fact that you need 23 is really all the same thing. Why is it that ein hakol ksherin? Why is it that a mamzer is disqualified from being a judge by din and nefashos? Because you need 23, the hainu Sanhedrin, which is the small Sanhedrin. Over Sanhedrin ksiv and nasu itach bedomin lach. It's over there by Sanhedrin that it says those who are similar to you. That's what we learn out from v'nasu itach miyuchas and kamoscha. It has to be people who have proper lineage like you. And then the Gemara said a zaken, an elder, is actually disqualified. Sheshachach kvar tzar gidol banim. He's already old enough that he's forgotten the pain of raising children. Ve'ino rachmani, so he doesn't have as much mercy. V'chein saris, and the same is true when we're talking about somebody who is castrated. And the Gemara continues at the 2 dots. The Mishnah said, Hakol ksherin lodin dinei mamanis. Everybody is kosher to be a judge when it comes to monetary cases. And the Gemara says, Hakol lasuye mai. What is Hakol coming to include? Amar Rav Yehuda says, lasuye mamzer. It's coming to include a mamzer. Even a mamzer can be a judge by dinei mamanis. But the Gemara asks, Satanina chodazimna. But we already have a Mishnah that teaches us that. It says, Kol haroy lodin dinei nefashos, roy lodin dinei mamanis. It says in the Mishnah that anybody who can be a judge by capital cases can be a judge by monetary cases. V'yesh roy lodin dinei mamanis ve'in roy lodin dinei nefashos. There are some who can judge monetary cases, but they cannot judge capital cases. V'havinon bon. We ask on that Mishnah, lasuye mai. What's that coming to include? V'yamar Rav Yehuda. And Rav Yehuda says, lasuye mamzer. It's coming to include a mamzer. Why do we have to include a mamzer twice? And the Gemara answers, chada lasuye ger v'chada lasuye mamzer. Actually, one Mishnah is coming to include a ger, that a convert can be a judge by dinei mamanis, and the other Mishnah is coming to include a mamzer, that a mamzer is able to be a judge by dinei mamanis. And the Gemara says, it's necessary to teach both, the iyashmin and ger, because if we only taught that a convert can be a judge by monetary cases, the roy lavo bakal, because a ger is able to marry into the community. Avol mamzer, but a mamzer who cannot marry into the community, emalo, I would say he cannot be a judge. The iyashmin and mamzer, and if we only taught mamzer, debami tipak shera, he comes from a kosher drop, meaning to say kosher seed, meaning to say unflawed lineage. That would be true by a mamzer, he comes from a Jew. Avol ger, but when it comes to a convert, the lo bami tipak shera, he does not come from unflawed lineage, he converted, he came from non-Jews, so emalo, I might say he's not able to be a judge by dinei mamanis, and so therefore it's necessary to teach again that both a ger and a mamzer can be judges by dinei mamanis. And the Gemara continues at the 2 dots. The Mishnah said, Vein hakol ksherin lodin dinei nefashos. Not everyone is able to judge capital cases. And the Gemara says, my time, and what is the reason for this, that you have to have good lineage to judge capital cases? The Tani Rav Yosef, because Rav Yosef taught, Kashem shebezin menukin betzedek, just like bezin is clean in regards to righteousness, kach menukin mikol mum, so too they are clean from all blemishes. Again, in this case, we're talking about lineage. And the Gemara says, Amar Amemar says, Mikro, what pasuk teaches us that they should be clean from mum? The pasuk says, Kulach yofe rayasi umum ein bach. You're completely beautiful, darling, and you have no blemish. And we understand that to mean, again, no blemish in terms of lineage. But the Gemara continues, V'dilma mum mamish. But maybe what we're talking is an actual physical mum. How do you know we're talking about lineage? And the Gemara says, Amar Rav Acha bar Yaakov. Rav Acha bar Yaakov says, Amar Kra. The pasuk says, V'siyatzvu sham imach. It says they stand there with you. Imach b'dominlach. Imach means with you. They have to be similar to you. But the Gemara says, V'dilma hasam misham shchina. But maybe over there, it's because the shchina was there that was talking in the times of Moshe Rabbeinu. And the Gemara continues, Alamar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, rather Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says, Amar Krutz, because the pasuk says, V'nasu itach, they'll carry the burden with you. Itach b'domin lach lahave, they have to be similar to you. And Rashi explains Mikol Mum, again, they can't have blemishes, Pagam Mishpacha. We're talking here about blemishes in terms of lineage, Misham Shechina, because of the Shechina. Hanach Devi Me Moshe, Hu Devayinan Miyuchasin. Maybe you need proper lineage in the days of Moshe, Shiu Roy Shetishro Shechina Alein, because they have to have the Shechina be able to rest upon them. Shechina Dechsiv Atzalti Min Aruach, as it says in the Pasuk, that the Shechina rests upon them. V'nasu Itach, and so then the Gemara quoted V'nasu Itach, B'Sanhedros, Shechilak Lo Yisro, Lishbot Esa'am. There we were talking about the courts that Yisro set up in order to judge the people. The Inkan Misham Shechina. There's no issue of Shechina. It says it should be less of a burden on you, and they'll carry the burden with you. V'lo min v'nasu itach b'masa ha'am yolif. We're not learning from the pasuk of v'nasu itach b'masa ha'am. Tahu b'shivim zekenim shehalchu imo li'ol moed. That pasuk is by the 70 elders that are going with him to the Ol Moed. Ksiv, that's where that pasuk is written. Misham Shechina. There you have the issue of Shechina, but in this other pasuk by Yisro, there's no issue of Shechina, and that's why we understand that pasuk to mean again that in general the judges cannot have blemished lineage. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Sanhedrin Haisek Achatzi Goren Agula. The Sanhedrin, they would sit in a half circle, like the half circle of the threshing floor, Kedeshu Rowan Zeze, in order that they can all see one another. Ushnei Sofrei Hadayon and Omdim Lifnein, and the two scribes of the court, they would stand in front of them. Echad Miyamin v'Echad Mismol, one from the right and one from the left side. V'chosven Divrei Mechayven v'Divrei Mezaken, they write down the words of those who say guilty and innocent. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda says Shlosha, there actually were three scribes. Echad Kosev Divrei HaMezaken, one writes the words of those who say innocent. V'Echad Kosev Divrei HaMechayven, one writes the words of those who say guilty. V'Ashlishi Kosev Divrei HaMezaken v'Divrei HaMechayven, and the third one writes both of the words of those who say innocent and those who say guilty. And Rashi explains, Sanhedrin Afshel Chav Gimel, we're talking about the Sanhedrin, even the one of 23 judges. Kechatzi Goren Agula, they sat in a half circle like the threshing floor. Ba'agula Hayu Yoshvin, they sat in a circle, Kadeshu Kulin Rowan Zezeh, so they could all see one another. Lefishem Hayu Yoshvin Beshura, because if they sat in a row, Ein Pnei Rishonim Rowan Zezeh, they wouldn't be able to see each other. Uvagula Shlema Ein Yoshvin, now they wouldn't sit in a full circle. Lefisha Tzrichen Bali Hadin Voedim Likonis Ladabra Bifnei Kulam, because the litigants and the witnesses, they need to enter to speak in front of all of them. Shu Kulan Rowan Esoedim, that they should all be able to see the witnesses. Umedaktikin Bidvarim, to be very careful in the matter. Veloshi Pnei Hoedim L'Shura Zu V'Achorem L'Zu, we don't want the witnesses to face one side and not the other. V'chosven Divrei HaMezaken v'HaMechayven, and they write down the words of those who say guilty and innocent. Shneim Kosven Divrei HaMezaken u'Shneim Kosven Divrei HaMechayven. It means that both scribes write everything. They write the words of those who say innocent and those who say guilty. Shem Yeto Echad Yochiach Kisva Al Shel Chaveru. If one makes a mistake, we can look at the other one's transcript. Shlosha, and then Rabbi Yehuda says there are three scribes. Shlosha Havesh Mitoch Torah Chataimim Sheyir Ba'alein. The reason why there are three scribes is because of the fact that there's so many different reasons that they have to write down. Yitu B'davar, there's going to be a mistake. Ela Echad Kosev Divrei HaMezaken. Rather, says Rabbi Yehuda, one writes the words of those who say innocent. V'Echad Kosev Divrei HaMechayven. The other one writes the words of those who say guilty. V'Gimel Kosev Divrei Kulam. And the third writes everything. Umitoch Shein Torah Charav Aleim Lo Yiksru B'davar. And since in this way it's less of a burden on them, they're not going to write in shorthand. If one of them does make a mistake, we use the writing of that third person to decide, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Lamed Zayin Amud Aleph.